So this evening, we're going to have a little talk about modern life and about depression, two enormous topics. And we're not even going to cover a fraction of what we could speak about, because we'd be here till midnight or midnight next week. So we're going to talk about a small bit about what we can do, and then hopefully take something useful from it, so that we don't just talk about something and then leave it, but that everyone has something to take from this talk that they can actually put into practice, use in their own lives somehow. And that's what I'm hoping that we get from it. So, what we're asking is, what is it about modern life that makes us depressed? And Marty Seligman, a very famous American psychologist, and a lot of people might know him from his book, Flourishing. And he is the father of positive psychology. And a couple of years ago, he noticed something, that the rate of depression was now hugely bigger. It was much bigger than when he started, the beginning of his career. And that the people who were getting depressed were much younger. And that the average age of onset, instead of being somebody in their 30s or 40s, was now somebody in their late teens and 20s. And that the amount of depression he was seeing in his practice was 10 times what he would have seen as a young trainee or as a young psychologist. And part of his whole life and his whole work has been trying to explain that. And I suppose when we start thinking about it, when we start looking across the Western world, we start noticing that actually the rates of mental health problems, but especially depression, have increased dramatically over the last 30 years. So it can be hard to get statistics, and one country doesn't compare well to another. But when we look at, let's say, disability due to mental health difficulties, in the UK, that's doubled in 30 years. In the US, it's 2.5 times. It used to be that 1 in 100 people would need a disability payment due to mental health difficulties. Now it's 1 in 54. And so there's something happening. It's happening all across the Western world. It's not just happening in Ireland, but that we're not as well as we used to be. And there may be lots of ways of explaining this. Partly it might be a statistical artifact, that we're now counting things differently. Partly we're beginning to recognize things, that GPs 30 and 40 years ago didn't notice this stuff as much. People suffered with their nerves. They didn't have anxiety disorders. He enjoyed a drop. He wasn't really an alcoholic. And now we're actually starting to call those things what they really are. There may also be a bit of a push from pharma, that suddenly people are getting diagnoses that they wouldn't have got before. But even if you put all of those things together, it still doesn't account for why there's been such an enormous growth, especially in depression. The UK has some really nice data, much clearer data than the Irish data. But 40% of all disability payments in the UK are due to mental health difficulties. So if you're taking the entire UK, 40% of their disability payments are due to mental health difficulties. So this isn't something that happens off to one side. Mental health problems aren't something obscure or something niche or something that only happens to one person over there. They're happening to whole nations, whole groups of people. It's happening to every family, every town, every place, and every country. And it's in the last 30 years that governments and universities and all the people who are trying to count and measure these things are starting to pay attention in a way they never paid attention to before. It used to be the case that the person went off to the asylum, up the hill, round the bend, round the corner, wherever it was, but away and out of sight. And in fact, the problem is so big now that there can be no out of sight. And certainly no out of sight, out of mind. Laird is the name there, and he's a guy who works in the London School of Economics, and he's an economist. And he is one of the biggest reasons in the world why people are taking depression so seriously. Because psychologists and psychiatrists have been saying for all their lives that this is something serious, we have to pay attention to this. But once the economists start saying this is something serious, then governments start to listen. because he started to put numbers on it. He started to say $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and soon they were talking about real money. And as soon as they started talking about money, government started to listen. And so Lord Laird started producing reports from the early 2000s. He works for the London School of Economics and started giving them firstly to Tony Blair's government and then to David Cameron's government. And they started to listen. And one of the things he said is that financial stress increases mental health difficulties. Well, we all probably knew that. Unemployment increases mental health difficulties, but also vice versa. So if you're unemployed, you're more likely to get depressed or anxious. But equally, if you're depressed and anxious, it's hard to hold on to a job. And it's easy to slip off and become unemployed. And that poverty, long-term poverty, increases the risk of mental health difficulties. And that was all in 2008 and 2005 and 2006. And we all know what happened from 2008. All of those things, financial stress, unemployment and poverty, exploded. He was talking about a boom, a Celtic Tiger world, where everything, all the banks were fine and everything was fine. And that was clear then. Now, that's exploded across the Western world. When we look at Ireland, what we know is this month, 100,000 people will receive disability benefit due to mental health difficulties. That's 1 in 37 people in the population. So this isn't happening in some small, obscure way. This isn't somebody that we've never heard of. This is someone from our family, from our town, from our road. What we know is 33% of all disability payments will be because of mental health difficulties. So again, mental health isn't some small part of the budget. It isn't some small little thing that we can just ignore. In fact, the only small part of the budget is the amount of budget that's paid out on mental health difficulties, which is 4%. So 33% of all disability payments due to mental health difficulties, the amount we give to actually solve this problem, to actually help people, 4%. We also know that 40% of young adults have elevated levels of anxiety and depression. We have a lovely study, the My World survey, a fantastic, world-class survey of young people in Ireland. And we know that 40% of young adults have levels above what they should have. It doesn't mean clinical, but it's above what they should have. And we can start asking, and we won't necessarily get the answer this evening, but we can start asking, why is this happening? What is it about the modern world and the Western world and now that's causing this to happen? And so when we think of the pressures of modern life, there's obviously financial stress. There's a huge expectation on people. We have very complex roles now that we didn't have a generation ago. I see a lot of people, and I say obviously about 60% of my caseload will be women. And a lot of people, especially people who are working parents, they feel guilty when they're at work because they're not at home. And when they're at home, they feel guilty because they're not at work. When they leave at 5 o'clock, they're torn in two directions. And that guilt and that difficulty and that complexity isn't easily solved. They're stuck carrying that burden. We see a lot of pressures on children and young adults, much more different even than my childhood. My childhood seems quaint compared to the kids nowadays. And there's a pressure to be cool, and there's a pressure to be in, and there's a pressure to be on top of your exams, and there's a pressure to be doing this and on an online life and a real life and a parental life. And kids who only have, they're only kids at the end of the day. Someone said to me, they're sophisticated without being mature. I thought that was a very nice description of what kids have now. They'll be able to run you around the internet, but they still cry if you send them to bed. And I showed this talk to somebody and said, you have to include modern man. And I suppose that's me, but I have no idea what that means. And so I'm not going to speak about it. But the fact that I have no idea what it means is probably indicative of something. We have 24/7 connectivity. A lovely story from a lady who I saw this morning. And she said, the whole family were gathered around the TV last Friday. The Late Late Show was on. And not one of us was watching it because everyone was on a phone or an iPad or something else. So everyone was in the room. Everyone was sort of in a circle around the fire or the TV, but not one of them was connected. They were all somewhere else. And with that being online, there's a certain sense of having to be on guard, to top up in case you miss something, in case something happens and you're not in on it, in case it all moves too quickly. And there's something about just that little icon, that little, I mean, for me it's email, but whether it's IM or Twitter or something else, once it pops up, once it beeps, it's addictive. It's very hard not to want to see it. You know you don't need it, but you still want to see it. Very hard to let it go. We know we work harder. We know it's more stressful. We know we're pulled in lots of different directions. Generally, for a lot of people, there's been a loss of religion. And one of the things that has taken is there's a lack of a philosophical understanding of life, death, and suffering. That people have no place to put that anymore. There used to be a way of understanding suffering, understanding sadness, understanding difficult times, and we don't have a language or a way of understanding that anymore. And I think there's a gap there. And we're going to talk a little bit about why mindfulness and meditation and other things have been taken on so much. And I think it's because they're offering people that understanding that religion might previously have done. There's a huge breakup in communities. We can contact somebody in San Francisco. There's a fair chance we don't know our neighbours. I've rented for a long period of my life, rented in different flats and moved around Dublin and moved around different cities when I was in London. And you would live in a block of flats and you'd meet neighbours a year later that you'd never seen. You'd been in and out the same door for a year, but you had never met them. Or if you met them, you didn't know their name. And that sort of, you were all together, but anonymous. And we're coming to the first generation post the divorce referendum. And so you're now getting a whole generation of people who are coming out of more complicated family relationships. And a lot of these things, I suppose, they sound negative, but in fact, a lot of them are positives. A lot of them were really necessary. A lot of them we really needed. A lot of them were really good. They gave great freedoms. But with that, we're seeing some of the difficulties and the complexities and the stresses that they brought, because they're driving us in lots of different directions. And so it's hard to see how the genie for any of these things is going to go back in the bottle. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is we're screwed. The modern life isn't going backwards. And that's it. Thank you very much, and we'll accept all your questions. I suppose it's a little more complicated than the stats I gave you. But I presented them in a certain way, because often when you pick up the newspaper, that's what you get. You get one of those statistics shouted at you. This is the world, it's falling apart. Be frightened. This is what's wrong. 10% of this, 90% of that, it's all collapsing. And of course, that's only half the story. So one of the things we know from the Centre for National Statistics for Ireland in 2010, so this 2010 post-bust, that 8 out of 10 people in Ireland regard themselves as happy. We almost never hear that. But actually most of us, most of the time, are happy. Now, that's not everybody, and it's not all the time, and there's lots of things we have to work on. But actually, most of us are getting by. 7 out of 10 young people in Ireland regard themselves as happy. And that again is the My World survey. So with all the stresses and all the difficulties and all the pressures on young people, actually, most of them are doing fine. Most of them think they're happy. We might worry about them, and I suppose as an older generation, that's what we should be doing. But actually, they see themselves as happy and fine. And there's something very interesting about financial bust and boom, and we've seen this from other countries, that it is deeply stressful when you're in it. So if the bank is banging on the door, if someone is trying to reclaim a house, if someone isn't in a job, those things are deeply stressful. But if someone comes out the other end of that, so if the house gets sorted, if the bank gets sorted, if someone gets into a new job, that stress recedes. And with it, the risk of mental health difficulties recedes. So financial boom and bust doesn't have a long-term effect on mental health. What does have a long-term effect on mental health is poverty. So when you see, let's say, the closing of the mines in Wales, or post-industrial Northern England, so where the industries left and never came back. So where you see long-term institutional poverty over multiple generations, that has a huge effect on mental health difficulties. But 4 or 5 years, if people can make it through, and not everyone can, and don't want to make something small that isn't small, but if people can get through it, actually people do okay. When they're back in a job, the house is safe, the kids are okay, they feel okay too. And we're going to talk all evening about depression, but there's a couple of things that we need to talk about depression about. The average length of illness is 18 months. There was a stage where mental health, because it was so poorly treated and so ignored, that people were ill their whole lives. They were sent round the corner and they were never seen of again. But actually, people get better. The majority of people get better. And when they get better, they get back to their lives. In terms of treatment, it's far from perfect, but what is there is okay. 60% of people will respond to an antidepressant. 60% plus of people will respond to cognitive behavioral therapy. So if people can get access to care, most people will respond. Community initiatives have a really positive effect. And community initiatives generally aren't national, so people don't know about them. It's one thing in one town or one thing in one suburb. But those things are highly effective. So a thing like men's sheds, do people know men's sheds? Stitch and Bitch, the other one? That those things are hugely effective because they bring people in. So that isolation that comes with depression gets broken down. And it's only communities that can do that. Hospitals, doctors, psychologists can't do that. It's only neighbours and communities who can actually have somebody around the house to sew and knit. And just to do it every Tuesday and do it every Tuesday for the next year. And its communities are building up and doing that more and more. And one of the most positive things about the last 10 years is that people are becoming aware of mental health. And they're becoming aware that we need to do this. And if you're waiting for a government to do it, you could be waiting a very long time. And actually it's the communities who are coming out and are putting things together. One Good Adult is one of the biggest findings that came out of the My World survey. So a lot of kids were at increased risk. They had higher rates of anxiety and depression. The thing that kept them safe over time was if they had one good adult. So one adult in their life that they could talk to. One adult in their life that they could go to if they had trouble. And it became known as the one good adult principle. So if there was just one teacher, one grandparent, one older brother, one person they could link in with, that was hugely protective. They did have their difficulty, but it came out in the end. It worked out for them. And it's funny, we don't have the research for it, but in fact, I would bet my life savings, about this big, that there's one good adult is true for adults as well. That if each of us has one person that we can go to, one person that we know we can trust, one person that we can speak to, that is hugely protective of our well-being. And it's about linking in with that one good adult, that one good person, when we need it. So, sorry. We are not going to be able to inoculate ourselves from the modern world. We are not going to be able to row back the country and not have the internet. We are not going to be able to protect ourselves from a globalized financial market. It won't come. It won't happen. So we have to think in this modern world, in this 21st century, how are you and I and everyone else we know going to stay well? And I think the first thing is that we need to start thinking of mental health not as something separate, that we just our health. And that we look after our health in lots of ways, and that we need to look after our mental health in the same way. So let's try this in the room. How many people washed their hands yesterday? All right, thank you. I'll close my eyes. How many people washed their teeth? All right. How many people ate fruit and veg? All right. And we did all those things because we know they're good for our health. We do these small little daily things. We wash our hands 5 or 6 times a day. We wash our teeth 2 or 3 times. We try and have our 5 a day fruit and veg. And we know we do them because they're good for us. They're good for our health. We don't know when it's going to pay off, but we hope down the line, if we do enough small things, it's going to be good for us. But we think about our mental health in a totally different way. We wait for the crisis and the bang and the feeling terrible and then try to fix it. And actually what you're going to see over the 21st century is that mental health is going to be just integrated into health and well-being. And that looking after our mental health is just that daily stuff that we do for all of our physical health as well. And so what are the areas we're going to look at, or we're going to need to look at in terms of doing that? One is our body and keeping our body right. The idea that our head and our body are separate in some way is just going to go. Is that biological, that being in your body. And biology in mental health used to be about medication. But ask anyone who's ever done yoga how important their body is to their well-being. And all they'll talk about is their body. Getting their body right is going to be really important. Psychology, we're going to talk quite a bit about the psychology of resilience. We can't stop stress coming at us. It is going to come, and there's going to be more of it. But how can we have a mindset, a way of being in the world that is going to allow us to flow with that? That as the waves come, we go over them and not under them. And growing a healthy social environment. It's very easy for us to become isolated. It's very easy for us to get pulled away. It's very easy for us not to be in contact with that one good adult or that group of friends. And how do we keep in contact with that? And that's what I really want to have a little think about today, because that's the bit that we can each take with us. And this idea that the biological, the psychological, and the social all interact. They're not 3 things, they're one thing. And this should be easy enough for us. We're Irish, and it's St. Patrick's Day. We get the idea of 3 in 1. Not a problem. But often in the papers, you'll see these things reported utterly separately, as if they don't touch each other. So gene found for X, or, new psychology found to do Y. Jobs will blah, blah. And no kind of connection is made between all the other factors. And so if someone loses their job, it may affect their relationship, or it may affect their sleep, or it may affect the adrenaline hormones, or the adrenaline running through their body, or the stress hormones in their body. Or it may affect how they think about themselves and their self-esteem. And so it's going to affect people very differently, but it's going to affect them in these ways, through their biology, through their psychology, or through their social life. Because we're a physical being, we're a mental being, and none of us, no man is an island. We don't exist alone. We exist within a family, within a community, within a town, within a space, and we need to see ourselves in that place. And so when we start to look at how do I stay well, those are the 3 areas that we need to focus on. And so in terms of staying well, this is, I'm talking to 200 people, so I'm keeping it pretty broad, but this is the sort of thing that we can all do. And there's 2 things with asterisks, and they are in case things go wrong and things get pretty serious and you need extra help. And everything else actually is about daily looking after. It's the brushing of the teeth. It's the doing the bit of exercise. It's the washing the hands. Everything else actually we probably need every day to be looking after ourselves. And that's diet and sleep and exercise. It's that bit of personal reflection, so having that space so that we can reflect on, so we're not so crowded in our lives that we're not able to see the wood for the trees. I highly recommend meditation. It's the oldest form of personal reflection there is. We're talking thousands and thousands of years. Every major religion in the world has a different form of meditation. And the reason they all have it is because it works. And yet it's one of the things that's kind of fallen by the wayside. And we're trying to reduce the social pressure that we're under rather than increasing it. And trying to increase the level of social support. So who are we bringing towards us? And how are we reducing the level of pressure that we're under? We can't reduce it all, but what can we do? So in terms of the biological, we are the most sitting down generation ever. Our grandparents worked in the fields 10 hours a day, then got on a bicycle and cycled the 6 miles home. We go from bed to couch to table to desk to car to table to desk to bed. Never in 60,000 years of human beings has there been a generation that's done as little as us. And it's not good. Our bodies aren't built for it. We are 99% monkey. We are meant to be active. When we are not active, all the things that are in us get stored up. They're meant to be burnt off. Things like adrenaline are meant to be burnt off. But if we're sitting all day, which I mean, God, I am. I go from bus to desk to bus to home. If you're sitting all day, those hormones don't go anywhere. They just sit and stew. And that we really need to start to shift how we treat our bodies. And that's in small ways and big ways. But the idea that the only way of resting is to sit isn't going to help us. We sit too much. We generally look after our cars better than we look after ourselves. The cars get a service once a year. When a light goes on, we bring it to the mechanic. We refuel it once a week. But actually, what do we do when we're stressed? We take 2 more coffees and then work a bit harder. If we ran a car that way, they'd all be by the side of the road. I was talking to somebody last week, and I was just going through their day, and it was, and there wasn't a minute free. I said, yeah, you have that 15-minute gap, in the middle of the day. So, but what I want to do is to put this thing into it. And I was just sort of going, and I asked them about their car. I said, how fast does the speedometer go? They said, probably 150 miles an hour. Do you drive it at 150? No, I drive it at 30 and 40 and 50. But you're driving your body at 150, non-stop, foot to the floor. And we would never treat a machine like that, but we treat our bodies like that, and then expect them to be okay. And it just doesn't work. So, I mean, I'm as bad as this for anyone. gave this talk this evening. What did I do? I ate 2 bits of cake and I had a coffee, and then came in to give it. Not the right thing to do. But what do we do when we're stressed? Generally, that's what we do. We have the cake and the coffee and work harder. But in fact, we need to work the opposite way. When we're stressed and it's difficult and it's the week before Christmas, we need the time off, we need the rest, we need the refuel. And we need to just, if we only thought of ourselves the same way we thought of a machine, we'd ask a lot less of ourselves. Athletes know this. They know it better than anybody. They know how to peak and they know how to rest. So, obviously there was France, and we all know what happened in France. The previous 4 matches, they played the match, they won the match, they lost the match. What do you think they did the day after? Nothing. They got in the ice baths, they went to the physios, they lay down a lot, may have slept, had another ice bath. They did nothing at all. Because the best thing that they could do for their bodies is nothing. Allow it to repair, allow it to, look after itself. And that's the peak of their year, their most stressful period. They're not out training 10 times a day. They're doing less training. They trained last summer. That's when they do their physical training. And now it's just about videos and ice baths. But we treat ourselves in a totally different way. When it comes to our busiest time, our most stressful time, we push ourselves beyond where we can go. And so there is something about asking, when is our busiest time? And what do we need to do to allow our body to actually get through that, to manage that, to be good during that. So you have to get the body right. In terms of diet, it's worth looking at caffeine, alcohol, and sugar, and managing those things. Generally, we use all of them when we're stressed, and we're very good with them when we're not stressed. But in fact, if we can flip that around, that would be much better. That those things go down when we're stressed, rather than up. We need to exercise, And we need to exercise around 30 minutes a day. And there appears to be something magic about it, the number 30, the 30 minutes. And it's totally at your fitness level. So young people are going to push themselves a lot harder, older people mightn't, but there's something about the endorphins that kick in at around 30 minutes. All the other things, yoga, mindfulness, Pilates, sleep, and trying to get the best of our sleep. And then identify downtime. Actually saying, I'm going to stop there and I'm not going to do anything for those 2 hours. I'm going to watch the box set, or I'm going to take the holiday, or I'm just going to take the evening off. Actually identify when we're going to do it. And we're very good at doing that when we don't need it. And we're terrible at doing it when we really need it. And there's something about very disciplined about giving it to ourselves when we need it. So the dog is happy and the man is stressed. And the thing is, they're both in the park. And there's just a lot of truth in it. That we carry round in our minds all the clamour, all the noise, all the stress, all the difficulty. And we struggle then to enjoy the thing that's just in front of us, the thing that's just there. And if we can get engaged with that, the thing that's just there, actually we can get a lot from it. And if we can bring our mind to just be in the park, just to be at the thing that's in front of us, then we can really get something from it. It's not easy to train ourselves to be like the dog. Because a lot of the time we have to train ourselves to be very efficient and to do 10 things at once, and because that's how we survive and that's how we do all the different things. But there is something really important, and it's a discipline about being able to turn that off. That I don't need to be efficient all the time. Sometimes the best thing I can do for myself is to turn off and just engage with the thing that's in front of me. Just enjoy it. And the thing about the man here is there doesn't have to be any crisis. He can just be carrying around so much little stuff that it becomes a crisis. I had a guy in session maybe 3 weeks ago said something really lovely and insightful. And he said, 4 stone of pebbles is still 4 stone. And I love that. And he said, I don't have anything major, nothing, I haven't lost my job, nobody's died, but it's like carrying around 4 stone of pebbles. And he can only get rid of that 1 pebble at a time. And that's what every day was like for him, carrying that 4 stone. So, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And we need to start thinking about what are we going to do every day for our mind. And there's a lovely, small but mighty little organisation called Mind Apples in the UK. And they ask everyone to do this. And this is all they do. They just promote this idea that I'm going to do. We know we eat 5 fruit and veg a day. That we're going to do 5 things for our mind a day. Now 5 seems quite a lot to me. I'd settle if everyone did too. But that we go, okay, what am I going to do for my mind tomorrow? And what is it going to be? And that we can't neglect it or ignore it or expect it to be fine without actually working on it. No more than we neglect our teeth and expect them to be fine. Or neglect our heart and expect it to be fine. That actually we actively, consciously need to work on staying well and being happy. And so deciding and writing it down, and what's it going to be? What am I going to do for my mind tomorrow? And then what am I going to do the next day? What am I going to do the next day? And that has to fit in with our lives and it has to fit in with everything else. But that I can do it. There is time. It is possible. And I need to do it. What we know about depression is there's a huge amount of negative thinking in it. Those thoughts come out of the blue, that they're overwhelming, that they don't allow us to see anything else. They don't allow us to see the positive. They don't allow us to see anything but the black tunnel. And we go down that hole. And that's the nature of depression. That's the nature of thinking in depression. And when you talk to people at those times, they'll tell you that the type of thoughts they have are rigid, general, and generally all or nothing. So I'm no good at this. I always mess up. It was a terrible talk. And this is just me. I should have done this. I should have done that. And those are the sort of thoughts that I could have now walking out of here at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. It'd be very easy. Short, rigid, general, overwhelming, all or nothing. It's either perfect or it's terrible. But what you notice about them is they're too simple. What we know about the world is it's desperately complicated. But what you notice about the thoughts and depression is they're very simple, very negative, often very short, 3 words, 4 words, and very tough. And what we try and ask people to do, can we see that? Oh yeah, is to try and balance that thought. So we're not looking to be 100% positive. That's often too big a gap, too big a jump. But looking to balance that. On the one hand, the talk I gave was a bit long. But on the other hand, some people seem to enjoy it. On the one hand, I tried too many jokes. But on the other hand, some people seem to laugh. And that rather than having just the negative bit, just the short negative first bit, we try to balance it with the other side. We try and balance it with a little complexity. And often, that's truer. It's more true to reality. That first negative bit, although it feels true in our gut, actually isn't a good picture of what went on. It isn't a good picture of how we did or how it went or what we experienced. That negative bit actually is too negative. And what we're looking to do, and what we'd often do in therapy, but what people can really work at it themselves, is trying to balance it. What's the other thought? What's the other side of that? And hold both of those things in mind. On the one hand, X, but on the other hand, Y. Yes, but I did this, however, I also did that. And holding both of those bits. And again, it's a mental discipline. It's not necessarily easy, and it doesn't come naturally to us. It certainly doesn't come naturally if you're Irish. If someone gives you a compliment, and the first thing you go, oh, this whole thing, I got it for a £5 in pennies. I know, with the wedding dress, no, I picked it up behind a skip. But instead of actually going, look, yeah, there's some things I'm not going to get right, or there's some things I'm going to feel negative about, or some things I'm not going to be positive about, but I can balance that. And learning actually how to do that. And that often is truer. It's closer to reality than just that negative bit. It isn't necessarily truer to our gut, but it is truer to the world around us. And it's a skill, and it's not an easy skill, but it's a skill that anybody can learn and develop and build up over time. And they can get better and better at it. So a little like learning to ride a bicycle, people will be really awkward at that in the beginning because the other comes much more naturally. But they get better and better at it. The more they practice it, the more they do it. This was about worry. So I worked in the UK for 5 years. And I worked in the NHS. And I worked in London, I worked in Oxford, and I saw lots of different people. But one of the things I noticed when I came back to Ireland is that everyone here worries much more. I've never worked with so much worry as I have in the last 18 months. And I don't know if that's what that is, but there's something about us overthinking, taking the pebble and working it into a boulder. And it's not an easy thing to undo that, but actually letting go of that worry. Saying the best thing I can do here is not to think about something. It's not often you'll hear a psychologist telling you not to think, but actually often the easiest way and the best way is actually, I'm not going to think about this. I'm going to park it, I'm going to let it go, I'm going to let it drift by. This is one I'm not going to think about. I'm not going to swing for this one. I'm just going to let it go. And that 4 stone of pebbles, that's where all that comes from. Because the person feels they have to hold on to it. They have to think about it. This isn't something I can let go. As opposed to just letting each bit goes as it comes. Yeah. I could talk about, there's a whole talk just in worry. But I think there's enough there that actually each of us needs to let go. I think we maybe see it as a positive thing, that if I'm worrying, I'm solving something, or if I'm worrying, I'm caring, or if I'm worrying, I'm getting to the root of something. But in fact, we're just putting a boulder on our shoulders. Social bit. We said earlier that no man is an island. That although we often talk about psychology and ill health, and some people have depression and other people don't, and we need to get well and all of those things, we don't exist alone. We exist in a community, in a family, in a relationship, among other people. And it's when we isolate ourselves that's when depression really gets in. So when we think about how we have our life organized, it's one of the session one for nearly everyone I meet. I try and figure out, how have you got your life organized? And then you realize that the person has what they're asking of themselves is here, and what any one human being can do is there. And that there's only so much. The expectations they have on themselves are so high. I have to be right at all of these 10 things. I have to do this for everybody. If I don't do this, I'm going to let everybody down. One of the very interesting things about the financial crisis is that you've seen people who have been worth 100 million, and you've seen people who are worth 100 quid. And especially among men, they come with the same thing. I've let my family down. How can I go back to them? How can I be? They're going to think this of me. They're going to think that of me. That the expectation they have of themselves is here, and they feel that they're failing it. And you often ask, if you could just get the family in the room, and we do, just to tell them that this is not what they're expecting. They don't want that from them. They just want their dad, or they just want their husband, or they just want their person to be there. And it isn't about provision, it's about presence. Just be there. But the expectation we have on ourselves is so high, and the pressure we put on ourselves is so much that we get weighed down by it. And so when we look at how our life is organized, often it's organized in a way that we couldn't possibly win. We couldn't possibly survive. We couldn't possibly feel well in it. And the first thing we have to ask is actually, how are we going to reorganize this? Because this can't work for you. And so when we're looking at how to rebalance, we're looking at, okay, how am I going to balance all these bits? The financial stresses, the work, the expectations. Where can I get some support from? So who can I talk to? Who's my one good adult? Who's my friend? Often when we start getting stressed, that's when the five-a-side goes. That's when the game of pool goes. That's when the nip down the pub to watch the match goes. We stop doing all of those things. But God, we need them. They're simple things, but we need them. And so how can I re-engage with the old supports I had, and are there any new ones that I need? And then is there anything I can drop? What can I get rid of? What am I carrying along? What job or role or expectation am I carrying that I don't need to? And either pass it over or drop it. And what can I drop? And initially, when you give that problem to people, they say nothing. I can drop nothing. I can stop nothing. I can't change anything. And that's where the work comes, and you're trying to get people to just begin to look and see and change, and small changes, and see how much they can actually surrender and give up. And so we often start with this. And can I restructure my life even a little? And what Zita will know, and maybe one or two other people if they're from the hospital, is that every day we have two coffee shops. We have the nice coffee shop, and we have the coffee that we get for free. A mouse may or may not have drowned in it. It's tough stuff. But the other coffee shop is quite nice, but you pay for that one. And every day at 4, I buy the good coffee. And I bring in the green and blacks. And I have 4 squares of dark chocolate. And I have my coffee. And I do that for 15 minutes. And then I run upstairs and, and sweat my guts out in front of the computer. And I can claim back that 15 minutes. And it's an absolute lifesaver. And no matter what's happened in the day, that never gets interrupted. Or almost never. You have to be flexible. But that's the bit I can take back. Because it's important, because I need it, because now I could just stay at the computer. I could just keep working. I could just, keep going at whatever I'm doing. Or I can actually say, I need that, and take that back. And so often the first thing I ask people to do is, when are they going to have their coffee, and when are they going to have their chocolate? And when are they going to build that into their day? And that has to be, if it's not blasphemous, sacrosanct. And start thinking like that. This is what I need, and the day will structure itself around me. You can't live with them. And it's very hard to bury their bodies at sea. So, all of the great pleasures in life come from other people. That's where we get our joys. That's, Brian O'Driscoll, first thing he does is he jumps up and he hugs somebody. That's the joy, is the team. It's not the winning, it's that the team won. I don't know if anyone saw the bear hug that Jamie gave Chris Henry at the very last minute of the match. I'm surprised Chris Henry could walk. He was so pleased for him that they did it together as a unit. Relationship is everything. And of course, it's the first thing that depression attacks, that we become isolated, we become internal, we go into ourselves, and that it becomes harder to be with our partners, with our friends, with our family. And often, those people can be stressful, and we all know this. We all know what Christmas is like. It's not necessarily, good tidings to all men. But often the people I speak to the least are those who are the closest. And actually, if we can reverse that, so that we're actually talking the most to people who are closest to us, and telling them, and getting on with them, and speaking to them, that's very important. That great joys come from those people. And it's very hard when we're depressed, because it wants us to pull back. And if we can work against that and move towards those people and stay in connection, that one good adult, actually our chances of getting through, not getting depressed or getting through depression are much, much higher. And we spend a lot of time in therapy trying to get people to reconnect to the friends, to the family, to who can it be? How can we do this? And sometimes it's small. It's Wednesday night, down the pub, Champions League, great. Brilliant, absolutely perfect. Or who can I phone? Who have I not phoned in 6 weeks, in 2 months? Who am I embarrassed to phone? It's been so long since I phoned them. And getting that person online. And trying to get people to actually move back into relationship. Because it's too hard to do it on your own. And that's true for all of us. So why are we becoming depressed? And there won't be any perfect answer to this. And if you had 1,000 psychologists, you'd have 1,000 answers. But one of the things is, I think we're becoming quite unbalanced. And each in our own way, our lives are getting pulled apart, so that we're trying to do too much on too little. And that our lives become quite difficult. And that's no one's fault. I think it's happening to us as a nation, as a generation. And that the best thing we can do is try to rebalance that and try to look at our lives and go, okay, well, how can I bring balance to that? And that's slow and gradual and not necessarily easy to do. And we just do it one small increment at a time and try to bring that level of balance. What we do here is outpatient CBT. So everyone knows the hospital and knows the hospital really well. The outpatient department is a good deal newer and a good deal smaller. But what we do is we offer CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy. We offer it in a couple of different forms. So we offer general workshops for kind of 20 to 30 people. They're once off, morning long, and they're just kind of bits of education, a bit of an overview for anxiety and depression. And so people get some good tips. It's not therapy in that sense. It's closer to a lecture, but people get to come in and ask some questions. They maybe get some answers, and the people have been very positive about it. And we generally run them either once a month, but sometimes the summer is a little different. But the next one is coming up in April. And there's the anxiety workshop on the 8th and the depression workshop on the 15th. We run CBT groups, which is, as you'd imagine, it's 6 or 7 or 8 people who have depression or have anxiety coming together to try and find some support together, because they're each going through the same thing. And we talked about isolation and how difficult it is to get somebody to understand. And it's often difficult even to get a professional to understand. But the one person who can understand is someone who's going through it as well. And so we run those all the time. There's one that's running at the moment. The next one will run from the middle of May, and the next one will be about anxiety in particular. But it's about trying to, who can I reach out to? Where can I bring that support? And that's one of the things. And then we run one-to-one CBT sessions, so therapy. And generally that's kind of for 6 to 12 sessions, and we meet one-to-one and go through the difficulties that people have. And that's primarily around anxiety or depression. And we try and get a picture and a plan and tailor it to each individual and do that bit of therapeutic work. And I suppose if you're interested in contacting us, obviously there's myself, there's Dr. Olivia Gordon, and it's Marie up in the outpatients department, and that's the number for that. All right. Thank you very much.